Israel has long been accused of spying on U.S. citizens inside the U.S., and in 2019, The Guardian reported that Israel was suspected by U.S. officials of having planted mobile phone spying devices in Washington. But this week, it's a private Israeli company that's being accused of selling powerful phone hacking software to repressive regimes. Here are the details. The Washington Post reports that 37 smartphones owned by people connected with murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi were targeted by military-grade spyware created by an Israeli company. The Post says these smartphones were on a list of more than 50,000 numbers that are concentrated in countries known to engage in surveillance of their citizens. These countries' governments are known to be clients of the Israeli company NSO Group, whose Pegasus spyware is ostensibly licensed to track terrorists and major criminals. Many of the numbers on the list were in the Middle East, but the greatest number was in Mexico. The targeted individuals include top military and political officials, as well as journalists and human rights activists. The spyware can easily bypass strong passwords and encryption and can attack phones without any warning to users. It can also read anything on a device that the user can, while also stealing photos, recordings, location records, communications, passwords, call logs, and social media posts. Some spyware companies use zero-click attacks, according to the Washington Post, which deliver spyware simply by sending a message to a user's phone. Such messages produce no notification, and phone users don't even need to touch their phones for infections to begin. Since the 1980s, U.S. aid to Israel of around $3 billion per year has been seen as unconditional. That's according to Stephen Walt, a professor of international affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School, cited by Al Jazeera. The idea has been able to rely on bipartisan support from both Democrats and Republicans throughout that time, after the U.S. initially offered aid conditional on Israel signing a peace treaty with Egypt at the end of the 1970s. After recent news events, however, cracks are appearing on the U.S. side of that arrangement. Here's what you need to know. President Joe Biden is being challenged from within the Democratic Party over the $3.8 billion of aid the U.S. sends to Israel every year, according to the BBC. Senator Bernie Sanders, for one, has said the U.S. should look hard at how the money is spent. Almost all U.S. aid to Israel comes in the form of military assistance, and its annual grants represent around 20% of the overall Israeli defense budget, according to a 2020 report by the Congressional Research Service. Israel has used billions of dollars on gaining military superiority over its neighbors. For example, purchasing 50 F-35 fighter jets, which can be used for missile attacks, or last year purchasing 8 KC-46A Boeing aircraft. Of the $3.8 billion given to Israel in 2020, $500 million, or around 13%, was used for missile defense systems. These include that Iron Dome system, toward which the U.S. has contributed $1.6 billion since 2011. Since 2016, the U.S. has also spent $177.5 million on anti-tunnel capabilities that detect, map, and neutralize underground tunnels that threaten itself or Israel. To date, the U.S. has provided Israel with $146 billion in military and missile defense funding, and its military spending commitments have steadily increased over the last 3 decades under the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. According to the BBC, since World War II, Israel has received more U.S. aid in total than any other country. In 2019, the last one-year period with fully reported figures, it was only receiving less aid than Afghanistan, a country that will receive much less aid now that U.S. troops are set to leave. The context for Israeli funding is changing, however. Last month, in the House of Representatives, U.S. Congresswoman Betty McCollum introduced a bill asking for guarantees that U.S. aid is not used in abuses against Palestinians, according to Al Jazeera. Meanwhile, last week, Democrats in both houses introduced resolutions aimed at blocking a new $735 million arms sale to Israel, according to The Guardian. While unlikely to pass, they reflect a 2021 Gallup poll showing 25% of Americans now sympathize more with Palestinians than Israelis, an increase of 6 percentage points since 2018. Of course, ties between the U.S. and Israel will not disappear overnight. The relationship is long-lasting and based on numerous factors, according to the Congressional Research Service report. These include what it calls shared strategic goals in the Middle East, a mutual commitment to democratic values, and historical connections originating from U.S. support for Israel's creation in 1948. So if it changes, it may well change slowly. Because of political conflicts in the Middle East, almost all of the internet traffic between Europe and India currently goes through the region's one relatively neutral country, Egypt. Google, which is competing with Facebook to build high-speed cable networks worldwide, wants to change this dependence on Egypt by running its planned Europe to India cable over Israel and Saudi Arabia. According to the Wall Street Journal, Google's planned cable would for the first time connect through these two historical enemies, Saudi Arabia and Israel. The journal says the breakthrough project follows deals orchestrated by the Trump administration that have created new diplomatic relationships between Gulf Arab states and Israel. The journal reports that analysts say the Egyptian government charges telecom operators some of the heaviest fees to traverse its land and waters, which can add up to 50% of the cost of a route from Europe to India. Expanded connectivity between Europe and India would also help Google roll out data centers globally. MIT analyzed the infamous chaos hack that targeted iPhones and found evidence suggesting the Chinese government is using civilian hacking competitions to find new hacks for a strategic hacking program, saying that China seemed to have used such a hack as part of its genocidal strategy to erase its Muslim minority. Here are the details. MIT's Technology Review magazine recently analyzed the infamous chaos hack that targeted iPhones in 2018, suggesting that China used a civilian competition to create the hack and then used it to spy on its Uyghur Muslim minority. The U.S. accuses China of committing genocide against its Uyghur population. The magazine linked the hack to a statement made in 2017 by the CEO of the Chinese cybersecurity giant Qihoo360 when he said Chinese hackers should stop participating in international hacking competitions, as such competitions give tech companies the chance to fix the hacks before China could use it to spy on people. The Chinese government agreed, forbidding its hackers to participate in such competitions. The next year, the first Tianfu Cup competition was held in China, where citizens are forced by law to help Chinese spy agencies. The magazine says that U.S. officials and tech companies later found that the prize-winning hack at that Tianfu Cup was very similar to the hack used later that year to infiltrate iPhones used by Uyghurs. For the past 7 years, China has committed human rights abuses against the Uyghur people and other minority groups in the western province of Xinjiang. Well-documented aspects of the campaign include detention camps, systemic compulsory sterilization, organized torture and rape, forced labor, and an unparalleled surveillance effort. The U.S. and a number of other countries have called the actions a genocide. The Guardian newspaper revealed that China has likely been spying on U.S. citizens via Caribbean phone networks for years. The paper based its article on research by Gary Miller, a former mobile network security executive. Miller has been analyzing sensitive signals data for years and says China appears to have used mobile phone networks in the Caribbean to surveil U.S. mobile phone subscribers as part of its espionage campaign against Americans. He says that China uses one of its state-controlled phone operators to direct signaling messages to U.S. subscribers, usually while they're traveling abroad. Signaling messages are commands that are sent by telecoms operators across the global network. They allow operators to locate mobile phones and connect users to one another. But some signaling messages can be used for tracking, monitoring, or intercepting communications. Miller said that China has lately favored more targeted espionage and are likely using Caribbean networks as proxies to conduct its attacks, having close ties with these countries in both trade and technology investment. The U.S. is currently fighting a massive hack that came to light on December 13th when Reuters reported that hackers had gained access to U.S. Treasury and Commerce Department emails. Since then, officials say that at least 6 government agencies were infiltrated and thousands of companies were infected with malware. The highly sophisticated hack was first discovered by a cybersecurity firm called FireEye. The company found that it had itself been hacked, meaning that the hackers could have hacked the powerful tools FireEye used to access top-secret systems. Researchers later found that SolarWinds software was at the core of the hack. They believe a SolarWinds product called Orion spread the malware via its own software updates. Once downloaded, the malware signaled back to its operators where it had landed. In cases where access was especially valuable, the hackers then used it to deploy more active malicious software to spread across its host. Part of the problem is that most people don't even know they have parts of SolarWinds software running on their systems or on systems they use every day.
For more news animations and explainers, hit the subscribe and bell button to join the TomoNews family. Thanks for watching.